Helen Dennis is a nationally recognized leader in the areas of aging, employment, and retirement from the individual, professional, business, and gender perspectives. She has received numerous awards for her teaching at USC's Davis School at the Andrus Gerontology Center. She is especially keen on bringing awareness to the non-financial challenges of retirement. She is my guest today. Welcome, Helen.
Thank you.
Let's talk. So Helen, tell me, how did you get in the field of aging?
I actually backed into it. This was nothing terribly strategic. I actually was a graduate student looking for a graduate thesis topic. So I wandered into the library and I picked up a book on cognition and aging. It never dawned on me that cognition and aging, that even would go together. So there was an academic experience, but there was another experience. My father-in-law was terminally ill with cancer, and he was in a skilled nursing facility. And so I spent every day for about 6 months with him. And although my area is not healthcare, it dawned on me that this field of aging, there was something very unique and attractive about it. One thing led to another, and I was invited to teach one day at USC on something called remotivation therapy. That worked well. It was the subject of my thesis. And then one thing led to another. There was someone who didn't have time to do 2 mental health grants. And they said, "Gee, Helen, are you interested?" I said, "Sure." So that was 2 days. And then it was 3 days. And then it was 4 days. And the last piece I want to mention is someone left the center whose specialty was retirement. So she left, and the person who I worked for said, "Helen, are you interested in that?" I said, "I don't know much about it, but I'll explore it." So I went to every seminar. I read everything possible. I went back to him and I said, "Ira, this is the most boring topic in the world." And then he said something which turned a switch on. He said, "Well, maybe it's your job to make it less boring." And I have to say, up until that point, being brought up in the 50s, a woman or girl, if you didn't like something, you either removed yourself from that situation or you kept quiet. Well, this was saying, be the change agent. Do something about it. And I have to say, that really turned the switch, and I tried to make this a slightly different field.
And you certainly have, and you've probably seen all the changes. So how has retirement changed? I mean, certainly from the 50s, but in general, let's say over the last 20 years, considerably, I know. So tell me some of the key highlights and change. And then in addition to that, how does it affect people differently? Because everybody's affected differently. We all age uniquely. So tell me what's going on.
I think we are in a retirement revolution in every aspect. Take the term. Yeah. Some people are very comfortable with the term, and that's fine. But I would say the emerging boomers who are looking at retirement are looking for other language. And so we hear it called the third age, we hear it called Act 4, we hear it called your Encore Life. So we see a change in language, that's number one. But the other thing I think which is a huge change, and this comes from working with about 10,000 employees on the non-financial aspect of retirement, is that we have a generation now that has high expectations. Maybe their parents were happy that if the children are married, they own their home, their children have a college education, life is good. We now have a generation that says, I'm still interested in peak experiences. Yeah. I have 25, 30 years ahead of me, and this is a whole new chapter in my life, so the expectations are high. So I think that's one big change. So one is expectations. The second is the role of work. We now find more and more people are working during retirement. So we have a new term, kind of the working retired. And some are working out of financial need, and some are working because they say, I love to work. I love the kinds of activities, the structure, et cetera. So those are two areas, expectations, the role of work. I think the other is there are more opportunities today than ever. Whether it is for an encore career, for volunteering, for going back to school, for running a triathlon, there are no borders on the page. But I would be remiss in saying that there's a downside. We know that when you talk about poverty and aging, we know that's a woman's issue. Right. Okay? We know financial insecurity is a very big issue, and not only for the amount of money you have in the bank, but your sense of confidence. We are in economically uncertain times, so there's an uneasiness, will I have enough? Okay, so there are issues, certainly there are health issues, diseases of later life, but on balance, I would say that of all the industrialized countries, we have more opportunity for older adults than anywhere else.
Yes, and that gets me to the golden encore. I mean, what is it, 6 to 7 careers we have in a lifetime, and now we have an opportunity, like you said, in retirement, or whatever you want to call it, for our golden encore. So that means you could start a new business. I mean, I'm sure you've seen changes where people go from, maybe they were a HP executive, and now they're artists, or, so tell me, how has that impacted, you know, the outlook?
Exactly, and you mentioned entrepreneurship, which is really very fitting. There are more entrepreneurs between 55 and 64 than with the younger set. You see, and typically when we think of entrepreneurs, we think of Silicon Valley, cool, young, right, hip.
Yes.
We're talking now mid to later life people who are becoming entrepreneurs. That is part of an encore life. But the whole term encore really suggests, for me, human potential. We aren't finished yet. There is a whole chapter of life to live which can be even better than the last chapter. But it's a mindset, because unfortunately we still live in a somewhat ageist society where there's certain social expectations of what are you supposed to do when you're older. We're trying to demythify that. So encore means that next chapter, and an encore career specifically, according to Mark Friedman and the Encore.org organization, talks about purpose, passion, and a paycheck for the greater good. Right. So it's giving back, it is combining the best of work and the best of volunteering, and if you get paid for it, it's okay. And it's called encore. And that term seems to be more comfortable than saying I'm a retiree. Now again, this is great for a certain group, right. But the upcoming boomers are looking for a more elevated position that reflects my potential, what I can contribute, and who I am.
And they're looking for personal fulfillment.
And personal fulfillment. And one of the things we know about boomers, when all is said and done, and they have education and the job and the house and the car and the Club Med, etc., they're looking for purpose, meaning, impact. It's all, where's the there, you know? So I think there's a real close relationship between the boomer movement, the oldest boomer now is 68, and this whole concept of encore. And it's encouraging.
Yes, it is.
And it's timely.
And you know, Mark Friedman, you mentioned him, I might as well mention the Purpose Prize, which is just, tell us a little bit about the Purpose Prize. I know about it, but tell the audience, what is the Purpose Prize and what's the purpose of the Purpose Prize? I mean,
there are multiple reasons.
Okay.
The Purpose Prize is for anyone over 60 who is re-careering, and in that re-career has made a major social impact. So it goes a little bit beyond what we would say a traditional volunteer. Social impact.
Right.
I mean, I can give you an example if you'd like.
I would like that.
One of my favorite examples is a man who comes from Mexico. And he comes here when he's 20 years old with $6 in his pocket. He sends his son to Bolt Law School. And during graduation, he says, I wonder why other gardeners, other Hispanics, cannot provide a real good education for their children. So he forms a nonprofit. And within a short period of time, he puts together $250,000 with contributions from the gardeners, from their clients, funds 17 students who in turn have to do some kind of social volunteer work. He got a Purpose Prize. I mean, it's one. There are many, many different examples. What that does, and they get $100,000, $25,000. Yeah. But what that does, it says this is a model. This is what we can do, and we're going to recognize it, we're going to reward it, we're going to publicize it, because this is another aspect of retirement. And we have very complex social problems in this country. Yes. And we have this resource of older talent, and this gives them a pathway. So everybody wins.
And you know, it's seeing that it can be done. I mean, you know, and rewarding it. I mean, and it's also so intrinsically valuable to the person that's making the, you know, the change or doing something that's not only good for them. They're finding that intrinsic fulfillment, but they're helping others.
Exactly,
You know?
exactly. And this notion of having a purpose in life.
Yeah.
You leave your job, you've loved your job, and then what?
Yeah.
Well, you can play golf and you be with the grandchildren, but is there more that you want to do? And for a growing proportion of our population, they want more.
Yes. Who am I without my business card? As you've said.
Exactly. Who am my identity? Yeah.
And you know, women challenge with that, have more challenges with that in general, I think, because you know, being a career woman and being a strong career woman, you know, we identify so much with that. But to try to cross over into the Golden Encore or any Encore. And you actually have written a book specifically for women called Project Renewment. And just tell us a little bit about Project Renewment, how it came about, because we're going to talk more about it in the second half, but just why did you write this book?
Let's keep the story short, but in 1999, my co-author and co-founder, Bernice Bratter, called me and said, Helen, I'm on my second retirement as an executive director. Is there any research, any programs about career women who are passionate about their work, who are now retired? Because I'm having a little bit of a problem. I said, I don't know of any research. She says, let's get together and have lunch to see if there's anything to talk about. That was a 4-hour lunch. That evolved into, why don't you invite some women? I'll invite some women, like-minded women, and we'll have dinner at my house to see if there's things to discuss. That was a 4-hour dinner. So we proceeded to meet monthly to talk about issues. And we knew we were onto something because we tape recorded our first 5 years of discussion. The other part of it is other women heard about it. They said, can we join your group? It's hard to join a group. And we said, you know, we'll help you start a group. Well, then there was another group and then another. Well, there are now 25 to 30 groups throughout the country that have grown virally to talk about that transition. So that was the beginning. The intention was not to form anything, but to have a rich dialogue.
Which you have.
And the dialogue goes on. The other part I want to mention, this started in '99, so now we're all more than a decade older. The nature of the conversation changes. The nature of the conversation, we talked about work to retirement transition, now we talk about other transitions that are more life stage related.
Yeah. And you know, women, we talk about everything. That's probably why we live longer.
Well, we do talk.
Yes.
We get to it rather quickly. We do talk.
Yes. And we're going to talk more about Project Renewment in the second half.
Great, thank you.
So think of retirement as a blank canvas upon which to draw your masterpiece. Retirees today must create new standards that fit their lifestyle, their needs, and their unique style. Project Renewment is a trailblazing retirement model specifically for the generation of women just now leaving the workforce. Keep watching Let's Talk to learn more.
Riding a bicycle can seem like child's play.
But only if you're playing indoors.
Riding in the real street has real consequences.
Play it safe. Ride by the rules. Cars and bikes need to play together.
The Project Renewment movement encourages and supports successful women, usually defined by their work, that giving up their careers does not mean giving up who they are. Sherry May, who enjoyed a long, extensive career in higher education, is a founding member of Project Renewment. She will share what renewment means to her right now on Let's Talk. Welcome, Sherry.
Thanks so much for having me.
It's my pleasure. So tell me.
It was. I believe it was 1999, and Helen and Bernice were inviting a small group of women, enough to go around the dining room table, to sit and talk. And the question was, what about careers and retirement? Is there anything to talk about as we move from successful careers into retirement? Is it just an automatic thing, or are you anxious about things, or what's going on? Well, I had very recently left USC I'd taken an early retirement, and I was involved in a number of consulting jobs that I was doing. And so I was right in the situation where I was really eager to figure out, what is this next step for me? And so we gathered at Bernice's house, and we talked, and we talked. And it was the most extraordinary experience, I think, that I have had. I've never been a real joiner of big organizations or even of women's organizations. But here you had a group of women who had, or some of them still had, very successful careers, but were anticipating many, many more years of life and figuring out what would that mean. You can go to a financial planner and figure out whether you've got enough money, and I think most career women had done that or were in the process of doing it. But what else? What was life really going to be about? And so for years, including up until today, we're still talking about issues. They've changed over the time. Everyone has, quote, retired from their major career, and some are now involved in secondary work, some for pay and some not for pay. But the issues have changed, and yet the intimacy of sitting around that table and trusting a number of people that you didn't know before to talk about really significant things can be life-changing.
And you had something in common, something very important in common. You were all coming off of being identified by your work, and now all of a sudden, how will you be identified?
And we were that kind of first generation of women who had come out of the women's movement, and so most of our mothers had not had major careers. Some of them had worked outside the home and some had not. But they, for the most part, had not been career women. And as we looked around us, we didn't have a lot of mentors to lead the way, but we had each other. And so we began to identify issues. We actually recorded many of our conversations those first number of years, which became very important because I think it gave a structure for us to be able to say, okay, this is what we want to talk about in some depth. But I can't emphasize enough the importance of trusting people and having an environment where you can really share ideas and share them in some kind of depth.
Intimately, and
Intimately.
not be afraid.
And not be afraid. We were very clear to begin with that we were not, a counseling session. This wasn't group therapy.
Right.
But it was rather exploring ideas such as Helen and Bernice later wrote, what am I without my business card? What is my identity? What's important to me? All of us had done balancing acts. If you have families or your careers or whatever, so you do balancing acts. We now continue to have balancing acts, but they were different. How are we going to now? We had a limited number of years, maybe 30, but what did we really want to do? We were no longer had the same ideas about being productive. We began to question what is really important for us? What's the meaning for me? It may be different from for you or for you, but what's really important?
And in these meetings with other women, you had an opportunity to share those ideas, to get feedback. Tell me, you mentioned the issues have changed. Tell me, what are the most significant changes personally for you and in the group that you shared, your time with? I mean, of course, 30 years different. 30 years ago, women weren't getting together talking about how they're going to retire.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
So that's probably one of the main reasons why you have to get together now, because you have to forge a new direction.
That's
so
right.
What else has changed?
One of them, I think, interesting topics that has come up recently has been the issue of legacy. Legacy can mean so many different things, and I know Helen and I have talked about this in terms of what it means for one person may differ from another. Does it mean being part of a foundation, or looking at your will and wanting to give money for something? Does it mean the values that you have in life that you may want to pass on to children and grandchildren? How do you want to contribute, and in what way? So the issues around legacy, I think, have been very interesting. We didn't think about that when we began. Other issues are around family. Many of us now are the last members of our extended families. So we no longer, most of us have parents around. So the dynamics of family change. The relationships with children change if you have children or with friends. The question of, do I want to stay in my house or my condominium for the rest of my life? So we could go on, but there are lots of issues that are, I would say, at the top now that weren't a few years ago.
And if I can add, I think some
Please.
of those early issues which we addressed, and I think you alluded to it, well, one was productivity. I mean, did you earn your keep today? You know, did you have a productive day?
Right.
And so what does productivity mean when you don't have objectives to meet and no one's giving you a performance appraisal? Do you still feel worthwhile?
And what does it mean?
You know, actually what we observed is that over time, the women define productivity internally. It could be taking care of yourself, an aging parent, going back to work, volunteering. And the big difference was prior, productivity is externally determined. And now women were determining that for themselves.
Personally.
It was a personal, but that was a journey. That didn't happen overnight.
And the relationship between productivity and money
that's a big one.
was an interesting one, because I think for many of us, they were tied up together in a way that as we began to explore the topic, they aren't necessarily tied up.
And you could see that they were separate, actually.
And you could see how they were. And so some women continue to have new careers, to develop whole new ways of getting money. I mean, they may, but for the most part, the relationship between money and productivity, I think, has really changed.
And I'll add one other piece, a very big one, I think, after newly retired, leaving the workplace, is identity. And I think you mentioned earlier, who am I without my business card?
Right.
When you're at a cocktail party and someone said, so tell me, what do you do? Well, I was an accountant, you know, I was an attorney, I was an administrator. How do you define yourself now? You know, what is the language you use? And then, how does our society even look at that, and do we care? And I think one of the big pieces is we don't care that much anymore. This is who I am. This is how I define myself, and that dependency on public opinion, and I think is a little different with maturity.
Yeah, I agree. And you said movement a few times. So tell me, is it a grassroots movement? It's getting bigger and bigger. I know that you have groups all over the country. Tell me a little bit about the movement aspect of it.
Well, as Sherry mentioned, we had no intention of growing anything. We wanted to meet around a dining room table and have a rich dialogue. So it has become a movement, and very grassroots. There is no board of directors, there's no money, there's no membership. So I say the good news is we are not an organization. The bad news is we're not an organization because we don't know how many groups are out there. I mean, 'cause that's the bad news. But that was a very conscious decision.
And one of the interesting things is how it has evolved and how different types of groups or organizations have emerged from Renewment. As you've talked, Renewment began as a new model for career women moving into retirement. But what has now happened, we have groups now. In fact, I'm involved in the South Bay. A new group has formed that calls themselves Our Living Room. And they are talking about, not career, they've been retired 10, 15 years. They're talking about later life issues of other kinds. We have another group that is forming that is looking seriously at the issue of staying in your own home as you age, and should they develop a whole new model for that. These came out of Renewment, but they're very different in many ways from at least the way it originally started.
So what have been some great surprises? Name the top 2 surprises as a result of the movement, Renewment, et cetera.
I think one surprise is that we've built small, enduring communities of women. This was never designed as a support group, but they're supportive. I mean, people have gotten sick, people have had chemotherapy, people have had some hard experiences, and their Renewment women were around them. And I'll give one brief story so we lost a wonderful woman at the age of 55. And towards the end of her life, I mean, just very touched. She said, you know, I know a lot of people, lots of people, but the women I want around me right now, they're my renewment women. So this notion of creating deep relationships. One woman said, I never thought I'd make a best friend at 65. It wasn't the intention. It was one of those unexpected outcomes, which has been a gift.
It's very interesting, Helen, that you say that, because when you asked the question, my immediate response would have been quite similar, which is to say again, the ability to have a group that you know you can trust them with anything, and for it to last all these years.
And briefly, where do you want it to go, and where do you see it going for you personally from here?
I would like to see, and I know Bernice shares this with me, let it spread throughout the country to whomever it fits. The concept is retirement and renewal. The concept is tap the human potential, live life fully, give back to the extent that you can, and do that in a collegial way with like-minded women. And it's grown virally, so let it continue.
Great. And for you, Sherry?
To be able, honestly, without reservation, to deal with whatever issues come up in the years ahead. We don't know what they'll be, they will change, but to be able to deal with them with a group that you trust.
Your renewment group. How wonderful.
Yes.
Thank you both so much for being with me today.
Our pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's my pleasure. Our program is brought to you by the Commission for the Senior Community, focusing on preserving and improving the quality of life for Santa Monicans 60 and older. For more information, visit our website on the screen now. Thank you so much for watching Let's Talk. Till next time, be well, live well, age well.